We thought we owned the sky. Every American fighter that crossed into our territory was just another easy kill. Until one day, a silver plane appeared on my six, and suddenly, I wasn't the hunter anymore. I was prey. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I flew for the Luftwaffe during the war. And in those early years from 1942 to early 1943, we were untouchable. Our Messerschmitt Bf 10-9s and Focke-Wulf 199s dominated every engagement. The sky belonged to Germany. The Americans? They sent over bombers protected by fighters that couldn't even reach Berlin. We shot them down like clay pigeons. We laughed at their attempts. We genuinely believed they would never catch up to us. But pride has a way of making you blind to what's coming. The American bomber formation started appearing more frequently over German territory in late 1942. Hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators flying in tight formations during daylight raids. Their strategy was simple. Fly high, drop tons of explosives on our factories and cities, then fly back to England. The problem for them was the distance. Their escort fighters, the P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, could only accompany them so far before running out of fuel. Once those escorts turned back, we moved in. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. These bombers were slow, heavy, and although they had defensive guns, they were no match for a skilled pilot in a nimble fighter. We would attack from below, from the sun, in diving passes that gave them no time to react. I personally shot down 3 B-17s in a single afternoon near Hamburg. My squadron leader had 7 kills that same day. We returned to base, drank schnapps, and joked about how the Americans kept sending their boys to die in machines that had no business being over Germany without protection. The Americans called it Black Thursday, October 14th, 1943. A raid on Schweinfurt. They lost 60 bombers that day. 60. Over 600 men either dead or captured. The 8th Air Force was being bled dry, and we knew it. Their commanders knew it too. They couldn't sustain those losses. Either they stopped the daylight bombing campaign or they found a solution. We assumed they would stop. We were wrong. Rumors started circulating in early 1944. Intelligence reports mentioned a new American fighter, some kind of modified plane with a British engine. We didn't pay much attention at first. The Americans had tried before. The P-39 era Cobra was a joke at high altitude. The P-40 Warhawk was outdated before the war even began. The P-38 Lightning looked intimidating with its twin booms, but it was heavy and not particularly agile in a dogfight. The P-47 Thunderbolt was tough and could take damage, but it guzzled fuel and couldn't stay with the bombers deep into Germany. So when we heard about this P-51 Mustang, most of us shrugged it off. Another American attempt to build a fighter that could compete with German engineering. Good luck with that, we thought. Our Messerschmitts had been refined over years of combat. Our Focke-Wulfs were powerful and fast. We had the experience, the training, and the aircraft. What could the Americans possibly throw at us that would change anything? I first saw a Mustang in late February 1944. I was flying cover over a formation returning from a raid when I spotted it in the distance. Sleek silver body, bubble canopy, single engine. It looked fast, I'll admit that. But looks mean nothing in combat. I had shot down British Spitfires that looked beautiful too. I wasn't worried. The Mustang was escorting a group of bombers that were heading back toward France. I positioned myself above and behind, planning a standard attack run. I pushed my stick forward and dove toward the American formation. My intention was to scatter the escorts and get a shot at one of the bombers, but before I could even get close, one of those silver planes peeled off and came straight at me. I was caught off guard by the speed. This wasn't like engaging a Thunderbolt that took time to accelerate. This plane moved like it had been shot out of a cannon. I pulled hard to the right, trying to get into a turning fight where my 109 had the advantage. But the Mustang stayed with me. Turn after turn, it matched my every move. I tried to dive away, using gravity to build speed. The Mustang followed. I pulled up sharply, hoping to stall him out. He stayed right there on my tail. For the first time in over a year of combat flying, I felt real fear. This American pilot wasn't just good. His plane was better than mine. Faster in level flight, faster in a dive, and somehow just as maneuverable in a turn. I finally managed to break away by diving into a cloud bank and changing direction multiple times. When I emerged, the Mustang was gone. He had probably returned to his bombers. I flew back to base shaken. That night, I told my squadron mates what happened. Some believed me, others thought I had just faced a particularly skilled pilot. Nobody wanted to accept that the Americans had finally built something that could challenge us. March 1944, Berlin. The Americans launched their first major daylight raid on the capital with full fighter escort. We scrambled every available fighter to defend the city. Over 100 German interceptors took to the sky. We expected the usual fight. Hit the bombers before the escorts could react, shoot down as many as possible, then disengage before we ran low on fuel or ammunition. But this time was different. The escorts didn't turn back. They stayed with the bombers all the way to Berlin. And they weren't Thunderbolts or Lightnings. They were Mustangs. Dozens of them. Silver streaks cutting through the sky at altitudes where we thought we were safe. They had the range to go all the way to Berlin and back to England. That alone changed everything. I engaged 3 of them that day over the outskirts of the city. The first one I attacked from above, a high-speed diving pass that should have given me one good shooting opportunity before I extended away. But as I lined up my shot, another Mustang appeared out of nowhere and fired a burst that tore through my left wing. I barely avoided a second burst by snap rolling and diving away. My wingman wasn't as lucky. I watched his plane explode in midair, hit by a Mustang that had climbed above us without either of us noticing. The entire engagement was chaos. We were used to being the aggressors, dictating the terms of every fight. Now we were defensive, reacting instead of acting. The Mustangs hunted us like we had hunted the bombers. They worked in pairs, covering each other, using their speed and altitude advantage to bounce us whenever we tried to set up an attack on the bombers. And their range meant they could chase us all the way back to our airfields if they wanted to. I made it back that day with a damaged wing and almost no ammunition left. We lost 14 fighters. The Americans lost less than 20 bombers. The ratio had flipped. Before the Mustang, we could expect to shoot down 10 or 15 bombers for every fighter we lost. Now we were losing more fighters than we were destroying bombers. The mathematics of attrition had turned against us. The Mustang had a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same engine used in the British Spitfire, but mounted in an American airframe designed for range and speed. It could fly over 1,600 miles with external fuel tanks. That gave it the ability to escort bombers to any target in Germany and still have fuel for combat and the flight home. At altitude, it was faster than anything we had. Above 25,000 feet, the Mustang was king, and most bomber raids happened at exactly that altitude. Our tactics had to change completely. We stopped trying to engage the escorts directly. Instead, we attempted to draw them away from the bombers or wait until they were low on fuel and ammunition. But the Americans adapted too. They started sending Mustangs ahead of the bomber formations to sweep the skies clean of German fighters before the bombers even arrived. They called them fighter sweeps. We called them death traps. By mid-1944, seeing a Mustang on your tail was essentially a death sentence unless you were very lucky or very skilled. The best German aces could still win in a one-on-one fight if they used every trick they knew. But most of us weren't aces. We were experienced pilots suddenly flying inferior machines against an enemy that had closed the technological gap and then surpassed us. The psychological impact was devastating. We had spent years believing in German air superiority. Our training, our aircraft, our tactics, everything was built on the assumption that we were better than the enemy. The Mustang shattered that illusion. Every time we took off, we knew there was a good chance we wouldn't come back. Not because we lacked skill or courage, but because the enemy now had a tool that was simply better than anything we had in response. Some pilots refused to engage Mustangs altogether. They would see that distinctive silver silhouette and immediately dive away or retreat. Others became reckless, taking unnecessary risks to try to prove that German fighters were still superior. Many of those pilots died, the smart ones. The ones who survived learned to respect the Mustang and avoid it whenever possible. But in total war, you can't always choose your battles. The P-51 Mustang changed the air war over Europe in a way that no other single aircraft did. It gave the Americans the ability to protect their bombers all the way to any target in Germany and back. It turned the hunters into the hunted. It broke the back of the Luftwaffe not through overwhelming numbers alone, but through technological and tactical superiority. By the time I was shot down in August 1944, the sky no longer belonged to Germany. It belonged to whoever had fuel, altitude, and a Mustang. We had laughed at American planes in the beginning. We thought their fighters were clumsy and their bombers were easy prey. But war has a way of humbling the arrogant. The Americans learned from their mistakes, adapted their technology, and produced a weapon that turned the tide of the air campaign. The Mustang wasn't just a fighter plane. It was the end of German air superiority. It was the moment we realized we were going to lose. Looking back now, decades after the war, I can admit what I couldn't admit then. The P-51 Mustang was the best fighter of the war, not because it had the most firepower or the thickest armor, but because it did everything well. It was fast, maneuverable, reliable, and had the range to go anywhere. In the hands of a competent pilot, it was nearly unbeatable. And the Americans had thousands of them. We learned too late that underestimating your enemy is the fastest way to lose a war. We thought we were invincible because we had won early victories against outdated opponents. But the Americans didn't stay outdated. They caught up and then they surpassed us. The Mustang was proof of that. It represented everything we failed to do in the later years of the war: innovation, adaptation, and the industrial capacity to produce a superior weapon in massive quantities. The pilots I flew with who survived the war all have the same look in their eyes when someone mentions the P-51 Mustang. It's a look of respect mixed with the memory of fear. We faced many enemies in the sky during those years, but nothing haunted us quite like that silver plane with the bubble canopy and the American star on its wings. It was faster than us, it could fly farther than us, and in the hands of a skilled pilot, it could outfight us. That was the reality we lived with every time we climbed into our cockpits during the final year of the war. The sky switched sides the day the Mustang arrived in numbers over Germany, and once it switched, there was no switching it back. If you want to see more stories from the other side of history, hit subscribe.